So President Trump has assumed power in the White House, and he hasn't wasted any time in threatening enemies and allies alike with the spectre of tariffs. Tariffs would be a complete disaster if they were posed on the British economy. There's a whole range of economic forecasts out there, but what most of them show is that there'll be a big impact on Britain. In fact, the worst case scenario is that we basically halve the rate of growth, we put up interest rates, and we raise inflation rates if American tariffs are imposed by us. So we need to make sure that we do everything possible to avoid American tariffs. But it's more complicated than that, because not only have we got to avoid tariffs from America, we've also got to figure out how to safeguard our economy if we don't avoid those tariffs. We should be thinking out how we draw closer to Europe. And of course, we've got to get the relationship with America right and Europe right, while not destroying our exports to growth markets like China, which takes about £30 billion of our exports every single year. So we brought in front of the Select Committee this week Douglas Alexander, who is the Minister for Trade, and Nick Thomas Symonds, who is the Minister in the Cabinet Office in charge of resetting relationships with Europe, to ask them some difficult questions. We started off by asking Douglas Alexander to just lay out exactly what the impact of American tariffs would be on the British economy and how he planned to avoid them. I'm afraid we didn't get terribly clear answers, perhaps for good reasons, but this is how the exchange played out. Mr. Alexander, how badly would American tariffs hurt the British economy?
Well, as a matter of principle, we're not supportive of additional trade barriers going up and inhibiting trade. But frankly, it is a little too early to judge effectively what this incoming administration's approach is going to be. We see significant possibilities and opportunities in the relationship with the United States. We are old allies, but we are open to new ways of working together. At the moment, we have a strong and balanced trading relationship. There's not a significant trade deficit, which is significant given much of the commentary in terms of the incoming president's thinking on tariffs has been related to the existence of trade deficits. But exactly how we deepen that partnership or what defensive measures could be taken in other circumstances, frankly, I think less than a day after the president's inauguration, there are frankly just too many unknowns. And let me try and explain why there are those.
I just want to tease out one piece of the puzzle, though. So there are at least 4 or 5 economic studies that I've seen that show a range of impacts on the UK economy of American tariffs. What's your sense of how bad a 25% US tariff?
There's no circumstances reasonably, Mr. Chairman, in which you could expect us to be publishing UK government numbers
but give us a
that
sense
would
of,
compromise
give us a sense
a
of how bad it would be.
strategy. Well, as I say, you're asking me to be several steps down a road that I'm simply not prepared to journey with you less than 24 hours after the president's come into office.
There would be a negative impact of American tariffs.
Oh, it's a matter of record that we don't support tariffs, and they could potentially have damaging consequences on a number of economies, but we're certainly not going to publish British numbers ahead of what could be important and necessary negotiations, we hope, on the upside rather than in relation to the downside.
But how will you dissuade President Trump from imposing tariffs on the UK?
Well, as I say, first of all, I think the challenge is to be honest and clear-eyed in terms of what we know and what we don't know at this juncture. Scott Bessent, in his Senate confirmation hearing, identified 3 aims for tariff policy: to tackle unfair trade policy, to raise revenues for the US government, and to strike deals with other countries. Is the objective of tariff policy really to secure leverage for non-economic objectives? Is it to reindustrialise the American heartland? Is it to raise revenues? You'll have seen overnight the reference to the External Revenue Service. Is it a security play in relation to concerns in relation to technology leakage and other issues? Frankly, we don't know the answers to those questions. And dependent on, if you like, what emerges between what candidate Trump has said and now what President Trump does, we stand ready to engage in the conversations, both in terms of where there are opportunities to deepen an existing economic relationship, and also to clearly and confidently articulate the UK national interest in any conversations that take place.
But at this stage, you don't yet know quite how best to dissuade President Trump from imposing tariffs, because we're not quite sure what the policy objective is of the new administration.
Well, if you look at the America First trade policy that was published this morning, UK time, by the White House, it does seem that even within the White House, the motivation is to do some more work, to build the rationale, to reduce the risks of legal challenge in relation to the tariff policy, and it would seem also to secure confirmation of a number of key officials in relation to trade policy. So we're not looking at day one tariffs, but the direction of travel has been pretty clearly set by that America First trade policy.
What's your confidence level today that you can dissuade President Trump from imposing tariffs on the UK?
I'm not in a position to give you a considered judgment on that. What I can tell you is that we do not believe that you need to choose between our allies and friends in Europe and our allies and friends on the other side of the Atlantic, and we stand ready to engage in those conversations.
So it sounds like, as we sit here today, there's an unclear impact that is possibly going to hit the UK economy. We're unclear about how best to dissuade the American administration, and we're not clear how confident we are that we can stop that impact arriving.
I disagree with every part of your question,
Perfect.
Mr. Chair.
Well, tell me.
Partly because, as I was trying delicately to suggest, simply because I
Be
am
indelicate.
not. So first of all, there is analytical work that we, as a matter of course, undertake as a government, but not all of that necessarily and appropriately should be shared on what you yourself described as a momentous day in trade policy. Secondly, it wouldn't seem wise or sensible to be sharing our negotiation strategy. And if you're going into a negotiation, I'm not sure it's entirely wise to put numbers about your level of confidence either. So each part of your question, respectfully, I disagree with.
No, that's okay, because my summary is there's a secret plan that you can't tell us and you can't give us a confidence level for whether you'll succeed. So most people looking at this would say, shouldn't we err on the safe side and actually start drawing closer to Europe as quickly as we can? We asked Nick Thomas Symonds exactly how we should do that. The reality is that Labour has set out a framework for a reset with Europe. It's in the manifesto. It says that we won't join the customs union, we won't join the single market, and we won't return to free movement of people. But if we implemented all of the things that we want and all of the things that Europe says it wants, we might grow our economy by somewhere like 0.3% or 0.5% a year. Not very much, certainly nowhere near the 4 to 5% of our economy that we've lost because of Brexit. So we asked Nick Thomas Symonds exactly what it was that we needed to get done. Was it something like an SPS deal, which basically means helping our agri-food sector take away all of the red tape, or could we go something further? Here's how the exchange played out. If the trade situation continues to deteriorate with, for example, tariffs in the United States, in that scenario, will you look again at options to deepen trade cooperation with Europe because the circumstances of global trade will have changed?
I don't think is it. Well, look, of course, circumstances change, and I won't get into how they might or might not. But listen, we are, irrespective of where different issues move, we are very ambitious within the framework of the manifesto. I mean, Centre of, you've mentioned Centre for European Reform. I mean, there are many organisations. I mean, Antony University have done work on what the value of an SPS agreement is, for example. So there's a lot of different figures out there.
It's a small fraction of the trade that we've lost, you'd agree.
But all I would say in relation to this is within the mandate that we have from the British people, the mandate we have on not going to rejoin single market, customs union, back to free movement. Within that, what I would reassure your committee is that we are ambitious, and I think in particular, if we were to secure an SPS agreement, I think it would be of significant economic value.
A Windsor framework-like mechanism that involves some kind of reference back to for advice to the ECJ is not necessarily off the table when designing an SPS.
Well, I'd be hesitant to get into specific design points at this stage, but I'm just observing that obviously what is with the Windsor framework, the previous government negotiated particular arrangements, which we supported from opposition. But again, what the Windsor framework represented was a very specific set of arrangements for very specific circumstances. And again, we'll be looking for something bespoke that suits the United Kingdom.
It sounds like pragmatically you're keeping your options well open.
I certainly hope, Chair, I'm always a pragmatist in these situations.
Okay. So the final piece of the puzzle was then to ask questions about how we de-risk trade with China. It's pretty clear to me that we need new safeguards when it comes to China around economic security, around things like labour standards, and of course we need to make sure that we're just not importing a load of goods that are full of carbon which Chinese factories have pumped into things. So we do need a new framework, and we've got to make sure that our trade with China is sustainable and safer than it is today. And that was our final set of questions to ministers. Here's how that exchange unfolded.
If you take things like the Uyghur Forced Labour Act, or indeed the provisions of the USMCA, you've got much tougher safeguards at the US border for preventing goods that have been made with forced labour entering the United States. We've heard evidence from companies that have given us some cause for concern as to the nature of the goods and the way those goods are produced entering the country. And so the question is, what is the UK government strategy for ensuring that we're not importing stuff that is made with forced labour?
So firstly, that's a very diplomatic characterisation of the recent evidence session that I observed along with many others. In terms of the approach that we've taken historically as the UK, it's been actor agnostic, and that is in sharp contrast to the Uyghur legislation that was passed by the US Congress. This is an area that we are looking at and we continue to keep under review. But in that sense, what was legislation that commanded widespread support, the Modern Slavery Act, at the time of its passage. I answered a UQ in the Chamber a couple of months back, just before Christmas, and was quite struck by the fact that not only were there questions being asked by people on my own side of the Chamber, but also by former Conservatives who I had anticipated would themselves be advocates and supporters of the Modern Slavery Act, saying that actually further action was required. So it's a matter that we're looking at, but in that sense, it's fair to recognise, A, we've historically taken an actor-agnostic approach, and secondly, we've taken seriously our responsibilities in relation to the WTO in a way that's not always been the approach with the legislative approach of some other countries.
So given what President Trump has said about tariffs on Chinese EVs, and we know that EU has also voted through tariffs on EVs, the UK is currently not proposing any such trade remedies as this. Do you worry that the UK market is about to be flooded in such a way that may destroy the EV market in the UK?
It's something that, as I say, we keep under review. If you look at the action that was taken first in the United States, I haven't yet had the chance to read it, but we've had the Connected Vehicles Review that was undertaken by the Biden administration. I understand that document dropped within a few hours of the outgoing president's departure. So in that sense, we have a cross-Whitehall process which allows us to consider the security aspects of that. That would be led by DFT, by the Cabinet Office and others, but we will be interested to see what that yielded in terms of the Connected Vehicles Review. Separately, then there is the decision that's been taken independently in the United States, the 100% tariff that President Biden imposed on Chinese EVs. That was then rapidly followed both by Canada and by Mexico, which my sense is broadly reflects the extent of integration of supply chains in terms of car manufacturing in North America. And the European Union has taken steps in relation to Chinese EVs.
Describe the risks to the UK market, but
well,
I suppose the question
just let me finish the point. One of the reasons that the Europeans have acted in the way that they've done was to seek to keep their actions in conformity with the WTO. In contrast, that's not been the approach that's been taken by our friends and partners in North America. And in that sense, it's an issue which I hope I've demonstrated we are alive to. But if you like, we're not going to be driven by other countries' actions as much as by our national interest.
Would you basically require or need some kind of message from the automotive industry before you sought to ask the Trade Remedy Authority for advice? Or are you basically monitoring what is happening with Chinese EVs,
the latter.
And you're prepared to act under your own powers?
The latter, in the sense that there are statutory powers available to the government to act in relation to tariff policy generally. Related thereto, there is the Trade Remedies Authority that was created by the last government, and we can have recourse to asking for an investigation to be undertaken. But if you like, there are reserve powers available to the government as well.
And you're not ruling out using those powers in the future?
I've not ruled anything out.
Do you think that we are going to need new safeguards around trade with China in order to protect and preserve the trade that we currently enjoy with the United States?
I would rather speak in general terms rather than identify the need to take action against a particular country. But let me speak in general terms and then we can answer other specific questions that you have. Firstly, I would observe, as I sought to reflect earlier, we are in a world in which there's a convergence between prosperity and security. I would indeed argue that there's not actually an irreconcilable tension between them. We have an absolute obligation to the defence of the realm as well as a government mission to raise levels of growth, and that extends to our work in support of British businesses. I know that you've written extensively on these issues, and it does feel to me that you've accurately discerned, if you like, a new dialogue around either economic statecraft or more broadly in terms of economic security. It is not coincidental that, as far as I'm aware, I am the first trade policy and economic security minister, and Commissioner Šefčovič, who's Nick's partner in the negotiations with Europe, is the Trade and Economic Security Commissioner. That is reflective of a significant shift that is underway, away from seeing trade policy simply as an instrument of classic market fundamentalism to a world in which geopolitics and geoeconomics are converging.
So there we have it. Not much clarity about what the future of the UK trade strategy and Europe strategy is going to look like. And that's why on the Business and Trade Committee we've launched a new inquiry on export-led growth. We'll be going to Brussels and to the World Trade Organization next week to begin taking evidence on this. And we'll then be bringing back a report to Parliament in a couple of months' time, just to help make sure that we get these new grand bargains with our trading partners around the world absolutely right and in the interests of British jobs. If you've liked this video, please don't forget to like it and share it with your friends and networks. And of course, if you'd like to keep receiving these updates, make sure that you subscribe.